It started with a body floating in a river. Within 2 weeks, 5 women were dead, each murdered by the same unseen predator. The police warned, Theod, the killer, is among us. He is someone Sip's husband, someone Sip's father, someone Sip's neighbor. Theod, they were right. On the surface, Ipswich was just another quiet English town, streets lined with modest houses, children riding their bikes, neighbors exchanging polite nods. In 2004, when Steve Wright and his partner moved into Bell Close, they seemed like any other couple searching for a fresh start. He was quiet, polite, unremarkable. No one suspected that behind his ordinary smile lurked a darkness that would soon shatter the town's peace forever. 2 years later, in the icy grip of December 2006, the nightmare began. A police officer patrolling a riverbank spotted something drifting in the water. At first glance, it looked like debris, but as the torchlight cut through the darkness, the horrifying truth was revealed: the naked body of a young woman, floating silently in the current. Her name was Gemma Adams. She had struggled with heroin addiction and worked the streets to survive. The tragedy of her death seemed like an isolated horror until 6 days later, another body surfaced. 19-year-old Tanya Nickel. And then, one by one, the bodies kept coming. 5 women, all with similar struggles, all gone within 2 weeks. Some left in shallow water, others staged grotesquely in woodland, their corpses posed as if in some twisted ritual. Ipswich descended into fear. The police launched one of the largest manhunts in modern British history, warning that the killer was not an outsider. He was here among them, a neighbor, a colleague, a father. And when the truth came to light, the town's terror deepened. The friendly man at number 79, Bell Close, the one who waved politely, who smiled as he passed, was the monster they had been hunting all along. Because sometimes the deadliest predators are hiding in plain sight. Bell Close was the kind of street where nothing ever seemed out of place. The lawns were trimmed, the neighbors smiled politely, and life carried on at its own quiet rhythm. In 2004, when Steve Wright and his partner Pamela moved into number 79, nobody thought twice. A moving van parked on the curb, a middle-aged man carrying boxes, and a woman arranging furniture. It was all so normal, almost boring. But evil rarely announces itself. It slips in unnoticed, blending in, smiling back. To those around him, Steve seemed polite, perhaps a little quiet, but friendly enough. He was the man who gave a nod on his way to work, the man who kept to himself but never gave cause for alarm. For Pamela, this move was supposed to be a fresh start, a way to leave behind past struggles, debts, and disappointments. For Steve, it was a chance to bury his demons. But demons don't stay buried, they claw their way back to the surface. What no one in Bell Close knew was that Steve's life had always been marked by turbulence: a broken home, failed marriages, endless jobs, addictions, and obsessions. He had spent years chasing companionship in the shadows of brothels and back alleys, feeding an appetite that only grew darker with time. Moving to Ipswich did not heal him, it only placed him closer to his future victims. Behind those neat curtains, a mask was being prepared. Steve could smile at his neighbors during the day, but at night, his eyes wandered toward the red light district, toward the desperate and vulnerable women who haunted Ipswich's poorly lit streets, women whom society ignored, women who would not be missed until it was too late. For 2 years, Bell Close remained quiet. But evil does not stay patient forever. By December 2006, Ipswich would learn the horrifying truth. Sometimes the monster is not the stranger in the shadows. Sometimes it is the neighbor across the street, the man who seems so ordinary. It began on a cold evening, December 2, 2006. A police officer patrolling near Belstead Brook noticed something floating in the water. At first he thought it was debris, a mannequin perhaps. But as the torchlight swept across, the horrifying truth emerged. A naked body, pale and bloated, drifting silently in the current. Her name was Gemma Adams, 25 years old. Once full of promise, her life had been derailed by addiction. Now she was just another case file. Her killer had stripped her of everything, even dignity, leaving her to be found by chance. Just days later, another body surfaced. Tanya Nicol, only 19, her youth cut short. She too was last seen in the red light district. Her last known moments spent chasing money for drugs. She was Gemma's friend. Now she was Gemma's shadow. The town held its breath, but the nightmare was just beginning. The third discovery was different. Anneli Alderton, 24, 3 months pregnant, found, not in water but in a wooded area. Her body was posed grotesquely in a crucifix position, arms spread wide as though mocking the figure of Christ. It was no longer just murder, it was ritual, a deliberate performance by someone who wanted to be seen, who wanted to send a message. The horror escalated with two more victims, Paula Clennell and Annette Nichols. Both strangled, both discarded like broken dolls, both lives extinguished by the same cold hands. Nichols too was left in the crucifix pose, confirming that this was not random, this was the work of a serial predator. 5 women, in less than 2 weeks. Ipswich was no longer a quiet town, it was a hunting ground. Detectives worked around the clock, piecing together the timeline, interviewing the women of the streets who were now terrified to work. Every alley, every riverbank, every stretch of woodland became a place of dread. The murders had transformed Ipswich into something unrecognizable, a place where fear lived in every shadow. The killer was bold, confident, and escalating, and the police knew what that meant. He wouldn't stop until someone stopped him. The 5 women who died at Steve Wright's hands were not nameless statistics. They were daughters, sisters, and mothers. But their lives had been dragged into the undertow of addiction and survival, making them the perfect prey for a predator hiding in plain sight. Gemma Adams had once dreamed of a normal future, but heroin sank its claws into her as a teenager. To feed her habit, she turned to prostitution, exposing herself nightly to dangers most people could never imagine. Tanya Nicol, only 19, was bright and full of promise at school, but by 17 she had no stable home and had slipped into a world of survival sex work. Her friendship with Gemma gave her comfort, but it also tied her to the same tragic fate. Anneli Alderton was perhaps the most heartbreaking. Once an excellent student at Coppleston High, her life unraveled after her father died. Grief consumed her, and heroin became her coping mechanism. When she was murdered, she was carrying a child, an unborn life stolen alongside hers. Paula Clennell spoke prophetically to the media just days before her death. She admitted she was a bit wary of getting into cars, but I need the money. She knew the risks, yet poverty and addiction left her no choice. Annette Nichols, 29, was the eldest of the victims. Once a beautician and a mother, she lost custody of her child after spiraling into drug dependency. In the end, she too walked the streets, vulnerable and exposed. Each of these women had slipped through society's cracks. They were stigmatized, judged, and largely ignored. To their killer, they were easy targets. Women no one would protect. Women no one would look for until too late. This is what made Steve Wright's crimes even more terrifying. He didn't hunt at random. He hunted among those already discarded, those who could vanish without noise. In exploiting their vulnerability, he revealed not only his monstrous nature, but also society's failure to shield its most fragile. For Ipswich, the murders weren't just about a serial killer, they were a mirror reflecting uncomfortable truths: how desperation makes people invisible, how predators thrive in the blind spots of compassion. And for the families left behind, the pain was unbearable. Their daughters were not just prostitutes or addicts, they were loved, and their absence was a wound that would never heal. By December 2006, Ipswich had changed. What was once a modest English town was now living under a suffocating shadow. Every headline screamed, "Another body found." Every whisper in the pubs and markets carried the same question: who is doing this? 5 women were dead, each one discarded like they were nothing. It wasn't just tragedy anymore, it was terror. The police knew they were dealing with a serial killer, and so Operation Sumac was born, one of the largest investigations in Suffolk Constabulary's history. More than 600 officers were deployed, drawing resources from 25 different police forces across the UK. Helicopters buzzed over fields, divers searched rivers, forensic tents multiplied in the woods. Yet for all the manpower, the killer remained faceless, silent, always one step ahead. At a press conference, the chief constable made a chilling statement: "The murderer is among us. He is somebody's son, somebody's husband, somebody's father." It was a warning, but also a confession. The monster wasn't hiding in the shadows of some far-off place. He was right there, in Ipswich. The streets emptied after dark. Women refused to go out alone. Parents clutched their daughters tightly, warning them to stay away from strangers. Even men grew uneasy, looking suspiciously at their neighbors, their co-workers, even their friends. Police suggested the killer might suddenly be cleaning his car obsessively, or hiding unexplained scratches, or keeping women's clothing as trophies. This only deepened the paranoia. Every man in Ipswich became a suspect, every closed curtain a threat. The women of the red light district faced the deepest fear. They had to choose between risking their lives or starving. Some stayed off the streets entirely. Others, out of desperation, continued to work, but climbed into cars with trembling hands, wondering if this was the night they'd never return. Ipswich was gripped, not just by fear of death, but by fear of betrayal, because the killer was not a shadowy figure from outside. He was ordinary, invisible. He could be the man next door. And as the days passed, and bodies mounted, the question shifted from who is the killer to who will be next. December 19th, 2006. Before dawn, the quiet of Bell Close was shattered by flashing blue lights and pounding fists. Police swarmed the home of Steve Wright, the seemingly ordinary man who had lived there for 2 years with his partner. Neighbors peeked through curtains, confused. Why Wright? He was just Steve. But detectives had been watching him. His car matched witness descriptions. His movements aligned with the victims' disappearances. And most damning of all, he had been seen frequenting the same red light district where the victims had last been alive. The mask of normalcy was ripped away in an instant. Wright was taken into custody, his home sealed off with crime scene tape. Forensic teams combed through every inch of the house, searching for fibers, DNA trophies. The neighbors whispered in disbelief. The man they'd smiled at, The man who waved politely was the Ipswich Ripper. In custody, Steve Wright remained unnervingly calm. He denied everything, insisting he had indeed been with sex workers, but he wasn't a killer. His defense was simple. Yes, he paid for their company, but he didn't kill them. It was a weak shield against the storm of evidence closing in. As investigators dug deeper into his past, a portrait of a disturbed man emerged. Failed marriages, crippling debts, gambling, suicide attempts, an obsession with prostitutes, stretching back decades. He had once worked on luxury cruise liners, traveling the world, but instead of culture or adventure, he sought brothels. It was an addiction that consumed him, shaping his relationships, destroying his stability, and eventually driving him to violence. To Pamela, his partner, the arrest was shattering. She had believed in him, moved to Ipswich with him for a new life. Now she realized she had been sharing a home with a murderer. The arrest marked the end of the killings. Ipswich could finally exhale. The monster had a name, the nightmare had a face, and the quiet street of Bell Close would never again be ordinary. January 16, 2008, the trial of Steve Wright began. For over a year, Ipswich had waited, haunted by questions. Now in the courtroom, the answers would be laid bare. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence, forensic fibers linking Wright to the victims, CCTV footage of his car in the right places at the right times, and the testimonies of sex workers who described him as a regular customer. One even recalled how, just days after two bodies were found, Wright turned violent, pinning her down in a way he never had before. Wright's defense clung to a single thread. Yes, he visited prostitutes. Yes, he had been with the victims, but someone else had killed them. He was guilty of shame, not murder. But the jury saw through him. They saw the pattern, the cold ritual, the undeniable links. After just 8 hours of deliberation, the verdict came guilty on all 5 counts of murder. The courtroom fell silent as the judge pronounced Wright's sentence, a whole life order. He would never be released. He would die in prison, locked away forever. For some families, the verdict was closure. Finally, we can get on with our lives in peace, said Gemma Adams' sift father, weary but relieved. But others felt justice was incomplete. Paula Clennell Sipp's brother-in-law said bluntly, these crimes deserve the death penalty. Even in victory, grief lingered. 5 women were still gone, their lives stolen by a man who should have been just another neighbor. Ipswich had been scarred forever. Steve Wright now spends his days behind bars, a forgotten shadow, but the echo of his crimes still hangs over Ipswich, a reminder that the worst monsters are not found in nightmares or ghost stories. They are real, and sometimes they live right next door. Steve Wright may have been caught, but the shadows of Ipswich never truly faded, because for every killer unmasked, there are others still out there, hiding behind ordinary smiles, waiting for the right moment to strike. In our next story, we dive even deeper into the mind of another predator, one whose crimes were even darker, and whose secrets remain unsolved to this day.